إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us this ibadah and this adhkar after Fajr. And today we are on Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum washkuru lillah in kuntum iyyahu ta'budun. This command is extremely unique in two ways. Number one, it's unique in that it's a commandment to the most obvious action that a human being can do, which is eating food. It's basically an action that all creatures do, yet we're commanded to do it. So what does that mean? And what is the nature of the command to do something that human beings have to do? You have to do it to survive. So what is the value? What's the meaning of commanding it when it's something that you have to do anyway? The answer to that is that anytime that Allah commands something that is actually by aada or by habit of life is necessary, that commandment is a permissibility to enjoy it. That's what it means. It's a permissibility to not feel guilty about it. Okay. Despite that, even though we can't forget that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had his own parameters that he set for his ummah regarding eating. Namely that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not like the food that was overly ornate. And in one hadith, that takes more than 3 steps to prepare. So some kind of food where the meal, the food itself takes 6 and 7 steps to put together, such that the rich are eating such food that's far off from the poor. If you always look at the sunnah, the Prophet is always bringing the poor and the rich a couple steps closer to each other, so that the gap is not that. There's always going to be rich and poor, but the gap should not be much. So the Prophet ﷺ did not like that food be excessively ornate or even ornate at all, in the way that, okay, it requires 10 steps to put this together. Okay. That's something that the Prophet looked down upon. And he never praised food nor disdained it. Why didn't the Prophet ever praise food? Because it's a habit of the gluttonous to sit and talk, oh, this is amazing, etc., etc. There's not on record once the Prophet ﷺ, besides thanking Allah for the food, that he praised it excessively or at all. And in fact, now you might think, oh, that's like disrespect to the food. No, it's not. No one respected the food more than the Messenger, peace be upon him, when he found Sayyidah Aisha walked past a small piece of bread on the floor. And he said, yeah, Aisha, there's never a people who are no longer grateful for the blessing that Allah gave them, except that he takes it away. And when he takes it away, he hardly ever gives it back. And that hadith points to, in fact, the rule, the monarchy, kingdom. And if you look at every civilization, they had kingdom and rule and monarchy once, and then they lost it and never got it back. Like the Greeks, the Romans, all these nations that survive solely on tourism. You ever think about these nations? These nations have nothing. All they have is tourism, right? Those are the nations. Egypt, for example, although they had another type of era, which was a good era, which was a long period of time that spanned the Mamluks from the time of Salah ad-Din all the way to the time of the Ottomans. They had a great run, a wonderful, prosperous country with a lot of people migrated to Egypt, and the Egyptians produced a lot of scholarship for the Islamic world. Okay. So, and it was clean, and there were masajid, and they had an army, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, they were not viewed as the world's dominant kingdom the way there was in the time of the pharaohs. That like this is a thing to be beheld. That's what the pharaohs were. They were They were a phenomenon to be gazed upon, right? Well, Egypt. So when that passes, it never comes back. And that if you look at it, every nation got its time. Even the Aztecs. The Aztecs at one point, just because the Mediterranean world was not familiar with the Aztecs, and of course the Far East were not familiar with the Aztecs, doesn't mean that they were not a thing. We look at their artifacts and said, how did they build these things? Montezuma, they had an amazing civilization. It's gone, right? Boom, finished. So when a nation has a ni'mah, it loses it. What did the Prophet ﷺ say this about? A little piece of bread. And he picked it up off the floor, he dusted it off, then he wet it with water until it was clean and then soft again, and then he ate it. So the Prophet, peace be upon him's respect for food was the lowest common denominator of food, and he never went praising food. So what is the meaning and value of, O you who believe, eat from the good and do righteous deeds and be grateful to Allah Ta'ala. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من الطيبات ما رزقناكم واشكروا لله كنتم إياه تعبدون. So before we get into each one of these meanings, we're going to get into something else. We're going to get into the concept, the idea that this call is unique for a second purpose. The first purpose it's unique is that it's a commandment to do something that we have to do every day, or else we die. So that's curious. It's a curious point for that reason. And we just mentioned it. What it means is, in fact, it's a commandment. It's a permissibility to enjoy it. Not every verbal command in the Sharia is actually an obligation. For eating, it has all 5 rulings, and we'll get into the 5 rulings of eating. Okay, permissibility, recommendation, obligation, discouragement, and prohibition. We're going to get into that. But the second unique point is that this is the only commandment in terms of the mu'amalat, the acts of interaction, the things that we do in life. There's ibadat, what we do with Allah, and there's mu'amalat. Mu'amalat is what we do with each other. It's the only one that comes down in 3 formats addressed to 3 classes of people. The first one is Ya ayyuhan nas. O people, kulu mimma fil ardi halalan tayyiba. That's the first one. O people, Allah Ta'ala speaks to Ya ayyuhan nas, kulu mimma fil ardi halalan tayyiba wa la tattabi'u khutuwat ash-shaytan innahu lakum aduwwun mubin. So the first call is to people. So whenever verses were revealed in Mecca, they were tended that Allah Ta'ala speaks to Ya ayyuhan nas, O people. In Medina, it's Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. Okay. So when you hear Ya ayyuhan nas, that is a Meccan verse. When you hear Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, that's a Medinan verse. But there's another one. Okay. There's another one. That's why this ayah is so unique. Ya ayyuhar rusul, O messengers. This is why this one is so unique, because it comes now that Allah Ta'ala called the believers, and then he called the people in general, and then he calls the prophets and messengers. Okay. Ya ayyuhar rusul. And he tells them, kulu, commands them to eat as well. So here the Prophet ﷺ has the ayah, O people, O believers, and O prophets, O messengers, messengers, rusul. So this is where the Prophet ﷺ says, look at what Allah, and this is in the 48 hadith in Nawawi, where Allah Ta'ala has commanded the believers and the messengers to do the same thing. Ya ayyuhar rusul kulu min at-tayyibat wa'malu salihan inni bima ta'maluna alim. All right. So let's take a look at each one of these now. As we said, it's unique in that it's something that we have to do to live, but Allah commands us to do it. Secondly, it has come to Ya ayyuhan nas, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, Ya ayyuhar rusul. So let's take a look at each one of these and what's unique about them, right? We're not going to go so deep. We'll just take it in a way that you get the basic idea about it. Ya ayyuhan nas, kulu mimma fil ard. Eat what's in the earth. Halalan tayyiba. ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين. So, first thing, the biggest point here is that if you do not do what is above, if you go against, if you eat what is not halal and not tayyib, then what are you doing? You are in fact following in the footsteps of shaitan. Okay. Because it's one of the shaitan's first plots against a human being is to alter his eating habits. That is the first thing that shaitan wants to do to a human being. And therefore, the first in reverse of that, the first step to increasing nearness to Allah is to alter your eating habits. And the alteration of eating habits is going to come in the three major steps. The first step is the separation between halal and haram. The second step is the alteration between tayyib and khabith. And the third step is the alteration between, or the variation between qaleel and kathir, eating too much and eating less. So the first one is an obligation. The second one is a recommendation. And the third one is a fadila, an adornment for a mu'min. It's an adornment. So they're at levels. They're not all the same. The first between halal and haram is law of God. No discussion about it. You cannot have a discussion here, right? And you are fully in the path of Iblis if you have broken this. Even there are Muslims, subhanAllah, who are basically do not pray, do not fast, do not do anything, but they still won't eat pork. Why is that? It's like the last straw. Once you've gone there, well, what else is there? Because eating is something that happens every single day, that it becomes the last and final marker of what you believe, of what your identity is even. So this is why Allah Ta'ala has made it simple. Okay. And there are differences in the fiqh, which we're not going to really cover here. You should study your madhab of fiqh to see what is haram. But in the main, there's not a lot of foods that's considered haram. And even the prohibition in the differences of the madhab, the four madhabs are not all the same. So a prohibited food, let's say that's prohibited in one madhab, but permitted in another madhab. Let's say lobster. So it's forbidden by ijtihad, by like the prohibition in terms of the Hanafi school of lobster, for example, it's prohibited by their judgment, by their legal effort. But the prohibition of pork, excuse me, prohibition of pork is at a higher level of prohibition because it's prohibited by a direct nas of the Quran, an undeniable statement from the Quran, not an interpretation. So something that's prohibited by interpretation is less sinful than something that is prohibited by a direct text. So khanzir, pork, is prohibited by nas. So there's no discussion on the prohibition of pork. If it's one of the things that's ma'loom min ad-din bid-darura. Any 10-year-old boy, no, 10-year-old girl in Islam, they know that this is forbidden for us to eat. So it's ma'loom min ad-din bid-darura, which means known in religion by necessity, and that's the one category of things, the denial of which puts a person outside of Islam. Because what puts a person outside of Islam is the negation of what brings him into it. It's logical, right? What brings you into Islam is not just the shahadatain. It's also the general conception of what Islam is, of what you're entering into. If you think about it, no convert becomes a Muslim only knowing there's one God, there's a Prophet Muhammad. Every single one of them has a conception of what this religion that I'm getting into is. That conception consists of what is known in religion by necessity. They understand they're entering a religion that has prayer, that has fasting. Probably they know that's 5 prayers and the fast is Ramadan, that has pilgrimage and that has a sacred space in Mecca. That the claim is that finality, that wine and pork are forbidden, that adultery is forbidden. Things like that. The basic conception of what this religion is also part of what a person knows when they enter into this faith. So prohibition of something like khanzir, they put you out of Islam. So it's not the same. So that's the first breakdown, is the difference between halal and haram. Now, what's the second breakdown? Second breakdown, okay, is something that is in the realm of the recommended. And that is a tayyip, okay, wa ghayr al-tayyib. You don't want to say khabith because khabith would be haram, right? But I mean, sometimes khabith is used as, it's synonymous with prohibited, and sometimes khabith is just used as something dirty. All right. So there is a way in which something can be halal, but not tayyib. But you have to realize we're in the realm of the recommended here. So even if something was completely not tayyib and khabith, filthy, it would still be halal for you to eat. But it's not necessarily good for you to be constantly consuming that. Give you an example. The way that animals, maybe that the way they're treated, okay? The way they're fed, and the way they're cooked. So you can have something totally halal like chicken, and these chickens are completely miserably treated. Their entire lives are in these miserable cages. So this is never getting sun. It's never getting fresh air. It's pumped with hormones. It is then fed who knows what. Who knows what it's fed? Because chickens, they'll eat a lot of different things, right? It could maybe have eaten a dead chicken. It would still be halal for you. It doesn't matter what the chicken ate. We're not taking into account by the chicken what the chicken ate, because the Sharia does not make you assess something that you physically can't possibly assess, right? We're not obligated to see what a chicken eats, although we're supposed to, as a recommendation, let it graze naturally. But if chickens are trapped up in a coop, and then one chicken gets stomped on and dies, and the other chickens start eating from that chicken, right? It doesn't suddenly make it haram for us. It's still halal. It's just not tayyib. Because the Sharia never asks you to go check something that's impossible for you to check. Likewise, a guy comes in, you're 7-Eleven, and he buys something from you, and you look at him, and the guy looks like a hitman completely, like a murderer, or like a drug dealer, or like a prostitute. You are only gauged by the Sharia on this transaction. Is it halal to sell this guy, let's say, a candy bar? Yes, it is. He's giving you the money, you give him the candy bar. Halal. Sharia does not require you to go 5 steps. Hey, where did you get that $1? Where did you get this $5? Sharia doesn't require that. It just requires, what are you dealing with? A customer. And he's giving you the money and you take it and go. Okay. Now, if that money's not blessed, you're going to lose it. It's going to be lost in a bill, a high electricity bill, or whatever is going to break down. You're going to end up spending money. So it may not be blessed, but it's halal for you. So in this case, the tayyib, now sometimes this food this chicken is slaughtered in it with all the makruhats, the discouraged things in slaughter, and sometimes even sinful things, such as slaughtering in front of another animal. Yet it remains to be in the broad category of halal. Just like wudu water. Just because you make wudu from some water, the Sharia calls it tahir mutahir. It's pure and it's purifying. Doesn't mean you'd ever drink it. So next thing is that some of this food is mashed up and then poured with pink slime, and then you get a nasty chicken nugget at the end of it. And it's just completely, nothing about it is wholesome. Yet the category of halal is broader than the category of wholesome, because the category of wholesome contains a lot of things that are impossible to always check upon, and is in some senses very relative to situations. If you have a situation where there's a low population, you can be as tayyib as you want. When you have to feed hundreds of thousands of people, then it tends not to be. So that's the difference between halal and tayyib. Now, it's from a type of nifaq and hypocrisy that a Muslim would care about the tayyib feature and not the halal feature. Then you're confused now, right? So remember, although halal is much broader, it's much more important. Why is it important? That's what Allah said. He only put one criterion. Sorry, two criterions. Number one, that the animal is something that you could eat. And number two, that the way that you killed the animal is slaughtered the animal, we should say, not killed the animals. There's a difference between killing and slaughtering. Okay. The way in which you slaughtered it is the way that he commanded. All right. And so that's it for the halal. He keep it simple. The tayyib now, it could go into many different categories. How the animal's treated. What is it eating? How is it slaughtered? And how is it cooked? You take it, the whole animal, you can put it all in one big blending machine with everything, every single thing. Then pour some pink slime on it, and you have a hot dog or you have a nugget. This is disgusting. And it's probably bad for your health. But you're not sinful. You won't go to hellfire for it. You might go to the hospital, but you won't go to hell. Third thing is the question of amounts of food that you eat. All over the shama'il. You cannot have shama'il without seeing that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam hardly ate his entire life. He hardly ate. When someone says, the Prophet Sayyid Aisha says, we would get 3 full moons. That's 2 months. 3 full moons is 2 months. Without the fire being lit in our house. I want you to go 2 days without using the stove and the microwave. Forget that. 1 day. I don't think it's ever happened in most modern homes. It's never happened that the stove or the microwave has not been used in your home. Like, well, what are you eating then? So the qilla and the kathra is now, we're now at the level of fada'il. It's now, you're highly virtuous. If you can monitor the difference between how much you eat, and the ulama say that if you were to simply restrain yourself from the final spoon of food, then that's enough. But you do this once a day. Every day, there's one extra bite that you want to take, and you avoid that extra bite. What are you doing? You're doing riyada to your nafs. You're training your ego that it can be told no. Now, people may think, oh, well, you're just creating a weak person. No, it's not. Because you're training your nafs to be told no in what's not good for it. So that when something is good for it and you say go, your nafs becomes obedient to your intellect. That's the goal of the spiritual path, is that your ego is obedient to your intellect. Straight, no discussion. What does the rule say? Or what does the guidance say? And what does the wisdom say? Do this, then my nafs will do it. What does the sharia say? Don't do this, then my nafs will not do it. If you get to that point, one of your rewards for that is you will be mujab ad-da'wah. Guaranteed. You will be mujab ad-da'wah. Because your whim now, your hawa, is following with what Allah brought. And when your hawa follows what Allah brought to a certain degree that Allah decides, then all of your hawa will be in line with what Allah has willed. You will find yourself desiring nothing other than what Allah has already willed for you. And that's the meaning of mujab ad-da'wah. So the first, ya ayyuhan nas, eat from what Allah has made halal for you from the earth. And tayyib, what is the result of it? It is the result that if you follow this guidance, you will cut off the avenues of shaitan. You will cut off shaitan. That's the first message. Let's go to the second one now. And we'll only spend a few minutes on each one of these. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum washkuru lillahi in kuntum iyyahu ta'budun. Now look at this one. This one goes straight to the tayyibat. The first one to the, O people, go to what is halal and tayyib. Okay. O people, go to what is halal and tayyib. But this one goes straight to eat from the tayyibat ma razaqnakum. And what means here is that the tayyibat here is synonymous to what is halal. Okay. The tayyibat is synonymous to the halal in this verse. Eat from the good things we've given you. But what is the point in this verse here? The additional feature is washkuru lillahi in kuntum iyyahu ta'budun. If you are truly worshippers of Allah, then give shukr. So what does it mean, give shukr? It means share your food. Hamd is to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shukr, hamd is to thank Allah by your tongue. Shukr is to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by your actions. That's a big difference between thanking Allah by your tongue and thanking Allah by your actions. You thank Allah by your actions by sharing your food. That's how. So, first step, take this food matter seriously, because if you do, you will cut off shaitan, and if you don't, you'll invite shaitan. You'll follow his footsteps. Secondly, be grateful about your eating of food by sharing it. And then the last one about the messengers. Ya ayyuhar rusul, kulu. This one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points us to another one. Okay. O messengers, eat what you have been, what is good, and do righteousness. So what is the point here? The point here is that by eating well, you will do good deeds. Okay. That's what it means here. By eating well, the point here is that it will lead you to do good deeds. You cannot possibly do good deeds if you're not eating well. Person who's not eating well will not do well. And that's the ishara in this one here. Okay. That's the ishara here, is that a person will not eat well, do good deeds, if they're sloppy about their food. So you see here, there are three main points that it comes, Ya ayyuhan nas, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, and Ya ayyuhar rusul, is that it will cut off Iblis, be thankful, and do well. So these are three themes surrounding food. Now, one last thing that I said we had to talk about is the quick mention of eating, having all five rulings. So the first ruling of obligation, it is obligatory to eat if when eating is going to cause, or lack of eating is going to cause death. So لا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة. Do not destroy yourselves. The Sharia tells us. Quran tells us. So therefore, any type of food, non-eating, anytime that food will help you avoid destroying yourself or self-destruction of any form, then it becomes obligatory. When does it become recommended? It was recommended when you become a guest, for example, right? When you're a guest, or you're a host, and your guest won't eat otherwise. Okay, it's not polite for a guest. Now, we have to study this. There's actually a fiqh or a guidance or a sunnah to how to be a guest. Should not be basically eating before your host. Nobody does that. You shouldn't be looking at the bookshelves or looking around the house without permission from the host. There's certain basic adab here. And so this one of them here is that a person should not eat before his guests, should not reach over the plate. So the host, in that respect, is recommended for him to eat so that the guests don't feel discomfort or shyness from eating. So that's where it's recommended. Then where is it discouraged? The opposite of that. It's discouraged to, if you're, for example, invited, then say, no, I'm fasting. But the host cooked all this food for you. So it's discouraged to stay fasting. Or that the host, you're the host this time, and you don't eat. You don't eat because and now you're embarrassing your guest. Your guest doesn't want to eat either. So that's makruh. That's where it is makruh in that respect, to refrain from eating. So when is it makruh to actually eat what we talked about, the guest eating where the hostess is not eating, for example, becomes makruh. Third and fourthly, when is it haram? Of course, we know it's haram to eat when the Sharia commands us to fast. Okay, and then lastly, when is it halal to eat? When none of the above applies. When none of the above applies, then we're in the realm of the halal. All right, let's take your any comments or questions. Okay, let me just adjust my mic for a second. It'll be, just give me 2 seconds to adjust my mic. All righty, so now we can go into our Q&A real quick, or any comments that anyone has. So, do Michelin star restaurants spend hours in preparing foods fall into the category of being superfluous? For them, yes, it's halal for us to eat it, but the action of overly cooking and overly spending time on that would be discouraged, and the admiration of that type of thing is something discouraged too. Can you give an idea of what is a halal career? Selling something halal. One of the best careers. Find something halal, sell it. If IT tends to be something halal in itself, its usage may differ. If a scholar says it is not your ability on how to get rulings of ijma, what does that mean? I thought we should all know this so we don't fall in disputes. Ijma is different than known in religion by necessity. Known in religion by necessity, every single one of us already know that stuff. But what's ijma and what's not requires scholarship. If you're frustrated by the fact that a scholar's saying that you can't figure it out, then that's the beginning sign that you're actually a student of knowledge. Because you're frustrated by your ignorance. That's the beginning of being a student of knowledge. The common folk is not frustrated by his ignorance. You tell him, you don't know this, you'll never understand it. You need to ask a scholar. You'll never get the answer by yourself. And he's like, fine with it. That's the sign of a common person, common Muslim. He's fine with it. But once you become like, I'm not fine with this. I need to know. So now you're a student of knowledge. Now go study and you'll be fine. That's a sign that you're shifting now from a common person to a student of knowledge. How do the clever students get the answers from a mufti? They study. Okay, but she's probably saying that there are clever students who get the fatwa that they want. Is that what you're asking? Because that exists too. That they literally tailor the question to only have one answer. These are veterans in asking fatwa. They're usually businessmen, or there's somebody who wants to get an answer that's halal. He hasn't been able to get it before, but he learned enough. Then they're veterans at getting the answer that they want and tailoring the questions the way they want it to be. Simply Salih says, if we have the option to buy between normal and free-range eggs and we buy the non-tayyip, are we consciously being a hypocrite? No, there's no hypocrisy in this. There is no hypocrisy in somebody who chooses says, listen, I'm sticking to the broad range of halal. I don't have time to study this organic, free range. I'm just going to eat the food that's halal. There's no hypocrisy in that at all. Even if someone was to eat haram, we wouldn't say that's hypocrisy. We would say that's sinful. So maybe the correct word is sinfulness. And the answer is no. There is absolutely zero sinfulness if a person is unable, even unwilling. It's not that they're sinful, but they're self-harming. So you go and eat junk old halal nuggets. Yeah, that's halal, but it's not the purest food. And then you eat airheads, and then you eat soda. As we said, you will not go to hell for that, but you'll go to the hospital. What if a person cannot afford free range? No problem. Because there's no sinfulness here. There's no sinfulness in avoiding the tayyip. It's just something that is recommended for you to do. Sami Aziz says, do the best you can. Does having the intention have impact on food that we buy and eat? Intention is more involved in the issue of cooking. So to have a good intention while cooking, oftentimes we can't really see this, but we do believe that it blesses the food. Alicia says, if halal meat manufacturer has a Bismillah recording in the facility, or has a person saying Bismillah to the truck of chickens before it slaughters them, is that practice halal? It is. General Bismillah over a large swath of animals is permitted. Asma Mushtaq says, what adhkar can you recite on food you consume aside from the Bismillah? As-salah on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Simply Salih says, eating well, even if it is a small amount, is better than doing the opposite. Does frequenting cafes and restaurants have effect on our state? It could. It depends on what kind of crowd that we're involved with, right? You can go to a cafe. It's all about the people. When we eat food, there's in a sense, there's an extension from something from the chef is transmitting into that food. I can't say it's a lot, right? But it has been said that something from the chef of that food or the cook is transmitted. Call it what you want to call it, vibrations, whatever, right? But the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ta'amus salihin yushtaha." The food cooked by the righteous should be desired. You eat from it, take from it, right? Eat it. Why? Because it was cooked by a righteous person. So what is the Prophet saying? It's as if something is being transmitted from the chef to the food. And therefore, if that's the case, then the opposite. Ta'amul fasiqin, yani the food of a fasiq or of someone who is a profligate or someone who's dirty should be disgusted. It should be avoided, right? It's not haram, but it should be avoided. What moral obligations, says Asma, are there on Muslims to lobby against widespread use of pesticides? Yeah, it is something that is an Islamic type of activism, you should say, right? It is Islamic type of activism, like Islamic meaning it's something promoted by the Sharia, would promote such an activism. Nafiz says, can someone give food that is halal that they won't eat themselves to someone else? If it's halal but you won't eat it yourself, you can give it to somebody else. Yes. Now, if you believe it's harmful and you give it to somebody else, but it's harm, then that also depends on, are you avoiding harm out of scrupulousness, extra careful, or is it actually fully harmful? So, for example, you don't eat candy because it's bad for your teeth, but candy in itself, like one time or a few times, is not going to harm somebody. So you give that on to somebody else, then that should be fine. But if something that you know is bad for you, right? Like you know that it's bad for somebody 100% of the time, then maybe that should be, something we would feel a little bit bad about. Like, I wouldn't, like clothes. I wouldn't wear this junk myself, but let me just give it to somebody else. Right. So I think that it would depend. I'm trying to think. I can't really think of a food where we would say that it's always going to be bad for somebody. I'm trying to think right now. Most food that it's bad if you have a lot of it. So if you're in a more of a state of scrupulousness for health purposes, then I don't think that should be a problem. Are eating disorders like eating following the footsteps of shaitan? Eating disorders, I think that they actually, eating disorders are more mental. And yes, maybe shaitan is whispering to this person that they have something, a problem that they actually don't have. Crazy Kid says, before eat, it will say Bismillah and McDonald's chicken burger. Is it halal? No, it's not. McDonald's chicken burger, McDonald's and other companies like that, they're not slaughtering their food. So you want to make sure that the food has to be slaughtered rather than just saying Bismillah on it. Slaughtered means with a knife across its neck. All right, looks like that's it for the questions today on this first Monday of Ramadan. Everyone's going to be off to work in a few hours. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.